Hello. How's everybody doing? I'm going to ring a bell. Ding, 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 ding. Now, you know we're teachers, so you got a couple of teachers up here. So when the bell rings, everybody sits in their seats and we start checking everything out. I want to, uh, I want to first begin by thanking all of you for participating here with us at Texas Public Policy Foundation. It is because of your interest and it is because of your energy that we're able to do the things that we do in terms of bringing policy to the forefront. And we are joined today by just two wonderful people. They're great, they're senators, but they're just wonderful, wonderful people. And I've
In
had
spite of that.
no. Along with that. But and I want to introduce you. I'm gonna give you a little bit of their bios because these guys have very, very long bios, but I'm gonna give you a little bit of it. And then we're gonna dive right into some conversation. Is that okay? Oh, just one housekeeping deal. And I only do this because the boss tells me I gotta do it. Is when you raise your hand or you hold up your hand for a question, make sure it's a question in there. you know, that's all we got to do. You know what I mean? And then I'm going to be good with my boss. They're going to say, hey, man, you were a great moderator. You kept the questions. Everything's all right. Okay? We got it? All right. Let me first begin by introducing Senator Angela Paxton. Senator Paxton, the Honorable Senator Angela Paxton was elected to Texas Senate in November 2018 and represents the fastest growing Senate District 8 in Collins and Dallas counties. Prior to this, now this is what I really, really love, because we're talking education today. Prior to this, Senator Paxton was a secondary math teacher, and counselor. I mean, math is a tough subject. For 20 years, she's the first educator elected to the Texas Senate in over 2 decades. Senator Paxton and her husband, Texas Attorney General Kent Paxton, and I call them a power couple. What do y'all think? Now, they met as students, education. They met as students at Baylor University and have been married since 1986, and they have 4 grown children and 1 grandson. Give her a round of applause.
3 grandkids. I got to update that part. That's the best part.
Oh, yeah. The grandkids. Look, I have 1, man, and they get a chance to go home.
That's right.
And Senator Creighton, our next panelist, was sworn into the Texas Senate to represent his district, District 4. During his tenure as a senator, he has taken the lead on key issues that matter to Texas job creators, including franchise and property tax relief, water transportation infrastructure, and border security, along with being the chairman of the Senate Education Committee. Before election to the Texas Senate, Senator Creighton serves as state representative for District 16, where his peers had elected him chairman of the House Republican Caucus. He is a graduate of University of Texas, UT, holds his Juris Doctorate from Oklahoma City University School of Law. Let's give a round of applause to Senator Creighton. And I'm gonna take a point of personal privilege, and we're gonna start with Senator Paxton. Senator Paxton, you taught in secondary education for 20 years. You're an educator to the bone, to your heart. What got you involved in education?
Well, my story is very special to me. All of our stories are very special, but I'm an adopted child. So, all my life, I have known that I might not have had the opportunity to live. My birth mother was a college student who wasn't married when she got pregnant with me, and that could have gone another way. But I was adopted by a wonderful man and woman, Wayne and Anita Allen. They were both high school graduates, but never went to college, but they really, really treasured the opportunity to be parents, because they might not have ever been parents. So my little brother and I, both adopted. education was really important to my parents, that we had opportunities to go further than what they had had. Isn't that every parent's dream, right? To help your kids do a little better and go a little farther and be who they were born to be, right? And so I loved school. I had great teachers that really poured into me. And I think that's a lot of what just grabbed me, because I loved school. And I fell in love with math when I was a high school junior. And I actually majored in math at Baylor. I was mathematical science, math and computer science major. And I had kind of been thinking about going the systems engineer direction. I had interned with IBM. But as I got to the end of my college career, I decided, you know what? What I really want to do, though, is teach. I've always wanted to teach. So Ken and I got married. We moved to Houston. And I did my master's degree and got certified to teach in secondary math at U of H in Clear Lake. And that's how I began my teaching career. So it was the inspiration of my parents who helped me figure out what I was good at and what I loved. I knew what a difference it had made in my life. I wanted to do that for other kids. And, you know, over the years, we have 4 children. They're all grown now. We have the 3 little grandchildren. But for our 4 kids, they're all different. So before the kids were born, I taught public school. After, when we started having our children, after I kind of had maternity leave, I had one child that was born kind of in the middle of the school year. I went back, finished out the year, and taught at my old high school. 2 of my favorite teachers who had made such a big difference in my life, I taught at my old high school under them in the math department and the physics department. And then when we started having our kids, I started hearing about homeschooling. And I'm like, I'm a math teacher. I don't know if I can teach a kid to read. But I discovered that there were great resources. And in Collin County, where we live, there's lots of folks that homeschool. So we started with homeschool. And I homeschooled all of our kids up through kind of early elementary. And it worked for us. As my kids were getting a little bit older, I decided, part of it was Ken running for office, and all structure kind of went out the window at my house. And so we put our kids in our local elementary school, neighborhood elementary school, public school, which was run by a great Christian man, great Christian principal, and we had great teachers. We had good experience there. Our son was very, very bright, and we decided that we wanted something a little different for him. We moved him into a university model school, Coram Deo. Some of you are probably familiar with that model. And then our 2 oldest did that. And as all of the kids got school age, we decided, you know what? We want our kids to have a Christian education. So when the time was right, I went back to teaching. So I had public schooled as a teacher, homeschooled as a teacher, right?
Best of all worlds.
And then also we did the hybrid model, and then I went back to teach at a private Christian school. And all of our kids graduated from there. They all found their niche. We were able to do what we wanted to do. But you know, the reason we were able to do that with 4 kids is because I was able to help pay for it with my teaching. So with 4, their tuition, even with the discount we got, my salary didn't quite get there. So I have a history of doing that. Now I'm a senator, it's even worse, right? So I didn't know there was something you could be downwardly mobile from being a teacher, right? But anyway, that's what we did. And
600 gross.
yeah. So but I was able to do that. That was an option that was available to us, that mattered to us, and we had a way to get there. Mm-hmm. But it's always been something I've thought about. Not everybody, people have different options available to them, right? Mm-hmm. So you move somewhere for a job. But you can't necessarily move just anywhere for a job because you want your kids to go to school in a certain place. So I love that we're having the conversation about letting parents have more choices, because I know it made a difference for me, and it made a difference for my children, and it's going to make a difference for my grandchildren.
Everybody. Senator Creighton, your thoughts about education. What brought you? I mean, you're chairing the education committee, so you have a broad interest in education. How'd you get started with that?
I appreciate the question. It's good to be with you. It's good to be here on the panel with TPPF, up here with my colleague, Senator Paxton. We were just on the dais together in the first Senate education hearing of the session. So it's just good to get into the mix, get the hearings going, get the bills going, get the discussions going. That's why we're here. That's why we do this. Talk about hearts and minds. I'm sure that's what led you to teaching, and certainly what keeps us in the mix as legislators. I have 7 public school teachers in my family. I have one heck of an advisory committee for education, and they don't all agree on exactly, as is the case, right? That's what makes the world go round, on the best ways that we can take our steps forward in the education space. But I ran towards the topic to answer your question. And I know you mentioned that the audience has to make sure they answer a question. You have to make sure the politicians, make sure the audience asks a question. You have to make sure the politicians answer the question, right? But I ran towards the space. I was very eager to, when Senator Taylor, who did a very good job with the Public Education Committee in the Senate, when he decided to retire, I was chairing the Higher Education Committee. And in the past, in the Senate, we've had these committees separated, but then also years ago, we did have them combined. And so one thing that we learned, and I was visiting with Lieutenant Governor Patrick on the same subject, is that through the damage of the COVID years and all the destruction that it caused in education and certainly in our economy, as all those different decisions were made, and we're sort of, in the rearview mirror looking back on all of those, the skills gap that was created in our workforce and the education gap created through just forcing students through our public schools to learn online, which we spent quite a bit of time on that information this morning, that data, and how we climb out of the results of the damage from that. I mean, I had in Senate District 4, I had school districts that never closed their doors during the pandemic. And obviously, you don't hear that very much, right? And obviously, they're showing much different results especially in math categories, than districts that did, with a pandemic that at the end of the day was launched from a virus that had a 99.2 survival rate. So we have so many issues to cover in education. I think we're on the cutting edge of opportunities in Texas to lead on not only parental empowerment and allowing parents to not only have the say they deserve in the future education of their children, but also the say that they deserve within the public school environment. And then the conversation that we're having is very exciting on other options related to choice. I mean, there is no reason why Utah and Arizona and Iowa should be leading the conversation nationally in America right now on school choice alternatives. Texas should be leading that conversation.
Well, all right, man. Look, you just took my whole panel, man. Look, y'all got any questions? But hold on a second. Before we go there, I want to, notably, education remains the most positive route toward upward mobility. Everybody knows that. And here recently, there has been a slight shift in focus away from traditional curriculums, math, reading, science. There's been some shift toward racial differences, gender identity curriculums slipping into our schools. And with the lockdowns of COVID-19, 75% of our kids fell behind. 2/3 of them are still behind and have not caught up. So we have 35% of our kids reading and doing math below grade level. That is a huge challenge for us. With all of that in mind, how does parent choice really impact a solution to these problems? And the second part of this is with the Supreme Court decision with Carson versus Macon, opening the door for faith communities to play a stronger role in the education space. How can we use these tools to help our kids catch up, get back on the right track, and start focusing on math, reading, science, and get away from racial differences and whether or not I'm a boy or girl? Either one, you could take it, and then we'll let both of you guys have a strike at it.
I'll lead off. I mean, I think, it's interesting how the issues framed around your question specifically are somehow painted up as partisan, right? I mean, we're talking about 6 million kids in Texas and what's best for them, not what's best for administrators, not what's best for hierarchies, not what's best for institutions, but really what's best based on the data and what we know today, rather than not 20 years ago, but even just, a year ago, 2 years ago. What we should be doing as legislators in this brief eternity second that we're blessed enough to serve, and all of those that lift us up and support the effort, 10,000 different people a day in the Capitol. What are we going to say when we're finished with our tenure? Tenure is going to come up in a little while. What are we going to say when we're finished with our term of service, right? And I can't imagine an issue that's more important to look back on and to be able to say that Texas led the conversation and the policy and the outcomes for, what can be achieved in the classroom. I mean, there's choice among public schools right now. There is choice among public and charters. There is choice in the private school opportunities, and certainly with all of our homeschool families. We need to combine the best of all opportunities and leverage that the best we can through scarcity of dollars in ways that are successful. All the different divisive things that have infiltrated our schools, and you mentioned some in your question, in ways that there is an attempt to indoctrinate fourth graders with political indoctrination, indoctrination related to whether or not they want to be one of 64 genders, how they might want to, just sort of, that particular educator's intent for them beyond reading, writing, arithmetic, and just learning how to think. Not necessarily in certain ways what to think, right? But just how to think in logical reasoning. It's very important that we don't overstep those boundaries, that we focus on what we do best. Isn't it amazing that in Japan, in grades 1 through 4, they focus not on grading curriculum, they're teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic already at those grade levels. But their grades are primarily focused on character, integrity, sense of country, duty, honor, honesty, even Western pragmatism. Are we teaching Western pragmatism in our schools today? Why is Japan, one of our allies, teaching what we are pragmatic about when we don't necessarily foster that same environment in some of our classrooms? It's fascinating and tragic, however you might want to put it. We have the opportunities now with so many of you leading and expertise to make some decisions that will lift up our public schools, make them stronger, related to curriculum, related to parental rights, related to a teacher bill of rights. Separate from that, we can create opportunities like never before with some choice options that help those who need it the most, and I can't imagine a greater sense of purpose for all of us here.
I'm so glad you're the chair of education. Aren't y'all? Well, I think as a school counselor, one of the things, it's kind of funny, when I first ran for office, I had an opponent who would say, she's just a teacher. He figured out pretty quick that a lot of people have like 15 relatives that are teachers, right? That was kind of offensive to people. I liked when he would say it because I used to be able to respond with, you know, I personally think working with adolescents all those years has been great preparation for politics. But you know, one of the things I worked with kids and was really a big part of what I was doing as a teacher was helping them with what we call psychologically agency. Agency is owning your choices. It's that you have the ability to choose things, good things or bad things, and then you kind of live with that. That's how we learn. That is literally how we learn. We make a choice. It goes well, it doesn't go so well. Maybe our parents gave us some advice and we listened or we didn't listen. But as we go through that process, sometimes going the right way, the wrong way, we're kind of like a little ball bumping around, right? But we start figuring out what works in life, right? Choice is at the center of agency. That's what it is. And there's something very powerful about choice for choice's sake in the individual. This is why people want to move to America, so they have choices in all kinds of ways, right? So they can decide what job they want to have, so they can decide where they want to live, all of these kinds of things. Choice for choice's sake is very, very powerful. And it has an impact on systems as well. One of the things I think is kind of interesting when we look at some of the indoctrination that has infiltrated our schools. Not all schools. Some traditional public schools have rejected this outright. Some have not. And one of the things I see as a difference is you have some school boards who remember that they work for the people in the community. You have the other school boards that think they work for the district. If you remember who you work for and you're responsive to those people, usually they get it right. But the curriculum that we're talking about, it's damaging and dangerous for kids and for the future of our country. One of the best things we could do to balance out what's being taught in our schools with just natural results is have choices for parents. I told a superintendent one time who was in a district that was not being responsive to parents about library materials. Okay, things are very inappropriate. And we had this conversation. He didn't respond the way I had anticipated. But after I got off the phone with him, after he'd vented about like these parents, right? I almost called him back. I knew he was going into a meeting. He was late going into the meeting because we'd talked. But I almost called him back and said, hey, you know those parents, the ones that are causing all that trouble, how would you like to get rid of them? I've got the answer. School choice. Because people will vote with their feet, yes, right? And parents who are fine with all of this, they will stay. And the parents who don't want this, they will leave. The school will take a look at, does this work for us? Can we keep our doors open? Yes, no, I don't know. In any given situation, who knows? But options help keep companies responsive to their customers, and they would help keep schools responsive and accountable to the people they work for.
Great free market principles. I'm going to slip off a little bit, and because Senator Creighton mentioned something, and I don't know if you guys caught it. he said that somehow this debate and this conversation has taken a turn toward partisanism. Mm-hmm. And looking at the data, you know, the Dallas Morning News poll showed that 60% of Republicans, 59% of Democrats support school choice in Texas. So that's 1% different. Mm-hmm. And looking across the United States, 30 states have adopted school choice, 30 states. and 18 of those are Republican states, and the other 12 have been Democrat, and Democrats and Republicans working together. Why has this taken such a partisan role in Texas? Because in Texas, we seem to be smarter than everybody else. We get it, man. You know, education is not about race. It's not about party. You know, freedom is not about race. It's not about party. These are nonpartisan issues. And we all should want the best for our kids. How do we address that here in Texas and bring everybody under this big tent of freedom of education as well as parent empowerment? How do we do that?
That's the magic. That's the silver bullet for this session, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I had the opportunity when Lieutenant Governor Patrick asked me to serve in both roles. I set 2 appointments. I set an appointment at Arizona State University to talk to them about their Freedom or Liberty Institute that they created on the campus of Arizona State that they wanted to scale across universities, public universities across Arizona, to bring, free markets, economic thought, conservative free thinking back into the university public, domain, right? And then my second appointment is I asked Governor Ron DeSantis if I could come to the Florida Capitol and just simply visit with his education team, senior level education team, about how they brought the House and the Senate together and with progress being made, that session in particular on school choice. And yes, the media turns this into a major partisan divide, right? Even though your polling shows a 1% difference. But again, we're a Republican-governed legislature in the House and the Senate with 30 years of Republican statewides. So the media can paint it up as a partisan divide, but on the other end, under that dome, we're driving the bus, right? I mean, when you've got the keys and you're allowed to govern, you have to govern, and you have to make bold decisions and solutions, not based on politics or not based on divide, but what you know is right. Risk the voters not sending you back, even though you're taking a stand and doing the right thing. And you have to rise above the partisanship, and you have to make things happen. So we've got partisanship holding some of these issues back, but then we also have, issues within each party that seem to not quite get there. And one thing I learned from Governor DeSantis' education team is Florida is very interesting. They have 1 school district for each county. 67 school districts. So when they have to have a meeting with senior level Capitol staff or legislators or the statewide team, they get about 70 people in the room. Whereas on our end, where I'm going with this. Well, we have over 1,200 districts and elected officials, and so many campus police departments and tax rates locally, and just on and on. It's very difficult to move the needle on Friday night lights, on community, and on the largest employer, other than Walmart, in a lot of the communities across Texas. It's just a very difficult thing to bring change. Yeah. And I think more than ever, this year, hopefully it's lightning in a bottle, and we're going to be blessed with God's plan to lead us in the right direction with wisdom and discernment. But I think we're going to have not just a conversation about solutions on school choice, but I'm hoping and praying for consensus, and I'm hoping that we're going to unite both parties, certainly our own, on these issues, and that like never before, our statewide governor and lieutenant governor and our speaker are going to be in the communities, talking, messaging, working with the members and the stakeholders. And to their credit, they're doing that now, and it's bringing a difference already that I can see in what are we in week number 8 of 21? Who's counting for session, right? And we're on a clock. Our founders were so wise to create urgency by putting the Texas legislative session on a clock. Washington, D.C. could learn a lot from that, because urgency should immediately, just as we're talking about the merits of competition, urgency along with that pushes our priorities to the top, and I think like never before, with a new education committee in the Senate and a new education committee in the House, we've got some incredible opportunities, not just with school choice, but with incredible reforms and initiatives for our public schools. Because nothing about this choice conversation is leaving behind our public schools. And the way I was raised with the 7 public school teachers in my family, school choice is not about attacking or tearing down public schools. But we are going to bring reforms to get the indoctrination out of the classroom, without a doubt.
And you mentioned, unity and solidarity from within. And I think that's very important, because when we look at the proposition that was on the March ballot in the Republican Party, 88% of the voters said that they were in favor of school choice and parent empowerment. Somehow we're going to have to, now you've gotten that message. You guys have that message. Y'all hear it loud and clear in the Senate. Somehow we're going to have to get that message loud and clear in the House chamber. And I'm just looking at what kind of influence can we utilize to help people understand that we still live in a democracy where government is for the people, by the people, and of the people, and hear the people's voice.
Well, you mentioned change is hard. It is. Change is always a difficult thing. And I was talking about agency a few minutes ago. When you just look at the psychology of things, I think when you think about how do we unify, I would take a moment to step on the other side and ask ourselves, what is the most powerful divider, right? What do people use when they want to divide? And I would suggest that it's fear. And when you listen to folks that advocate for options in education, I usually hear people talking about the benefits of it. When I hear the other side, I usually hear fear. And something we do need to understand about fear, it is psychologically the most powerful motivator. It is the magic bullet to divide. And so I think part of what we have to remember is how we can bring people together to the extent that things that are being suggested are actually accurate, right? I mean, that is part of the problem. But you mentioned this. No one is talking about abolishing traditional public schools. No one is. Right. What we're talking about, when we talk about choice, we're not only talking about private schools. I think when we talk about choice, at least, I'm talking about, what about just within school districts, that you could choose the campus that you'd like your child to go to. Some school districts do this already, but not all of them do. What if you could not just be attached to a specific school district because of your zip code? What if you're willing to drive a little further? Or there are some school districts where you live on the edge of the school district and the actual campus is closer in the next school district, right? Mm-hmm. That would create an option. What about charter schools? And I know we've talked a lot about charter schools. Dr. Johnson came to McKinney last year, I think it was, and we had a great conversation with some of the folks in the community in McKinney, but we talked about charter schools. And listen, there are wait lists for charter schools. What does that say? We need more charter schools. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to talk about how it helps kids, how it empowers parents. Yeah. And I guess this would be one of the other things that is at the center of my thought on the whole topic. When I mentioned I taught at a private Christian school the last 12 or so years of my teaching career. And one of the things I did was I talked with parents who were looking at our school. That was part of my job. And so I did a lot of study on what are families looking for? What are they looking for? And it was really interesting. But there were a lot of different things. Some of the families were looking to get their kids out of situations where they felt bullied, they didn't feel safe. Also very, very powerful, right? It's scary. Kids don't learn very well when they're afraid. But I also learned during that process that the magic formula for student achievement is great teachers plus engaged parents equals student success. When you let someone choose something, you think about this for yourself. When you make a choice, you decide to go to this restaurant, you decide to see this movie, you decide to buy this product, you're kind of invested in making it work. It's true with choices we make for our kids as well. When parents choose, whether they choose to stay where they are, just the fact that they didn't have to, they could have done other things, but they chose this. It gets them more invested. We need parents to be engaged in the process. It helps their kids learn. And when we look at anything and we say the teacher is not important, we're tying one hand behind the back of that, keeping a kid from being able to achieve. And when we push parents out, we tie the other hand behind the back. It hurts the kids, and it hurts their future. And Commissioner Morath was at the hearing this morning. He talked about, you may remember the exact numbers, but he talked about the correlation, really strong correlation between math achievement and future earnings. Now, I'm not a good example of this, okay? But
Oh, really?
not anymore. But math achievement, he talked about what the learning loss, how many billions of dollars in future earnings?
It was almost $1 trillion.
That's right.
It was an incredible number. Yeah.
So we cannot afford to not do right by our kids. It's money out of their pocket in the future, which affects their own families, which affects their grandchildren, et cetera. So I think it matters that when parents have options, they're more engaged. And if we can talk about this, about why it's good and what is good, and no one's being forced to do anything. No one's being forced. You're being allowed to do what you think is best for your kid, and it will help the kids.
Senator Creighton, I know you want to
Yeah,
chat.
just briefly, I wanted to mention off of Senator Paxton's comment about some decisions based on fear and being self-depreciating as a legislator. Many times in the past, we have shown that we're path of least resistance on change. We're path of least resistance on reform, right? I mean, we had 45 years of a soap opera called School Finance, right, in the courts. And we would make decisions only when the courts were telling us and forcing us to make decisions. That was a terrible culture that we were creating instead of being bold and ahead of litigation related to public schools. And we need to get out of that culture and be bold in our incentives and our ideas and our reform-based attitude. And, you know, there's certain denial associated with complacency, and certainly you can find the same in being comfortable. So there are certain school districts that are very comfortable. But as Coach Lombardi once said, you can find coaches a dime a dozen that can design plays. But it's rare to find a coach that can get into the mind of the player and motivate them. I think with Governor Abbott, with Lieutenant Governor Patrick, with Speaker Phelan, we have just an incredible opportunity among those three leaders to be able to motivate the legislative members to understand that these problems that they may not be facing inherent within their own political districts, right? These problems are what Texas faces for the future. I always tell legislators, if you have an opportunity to serve on finance as an appropriator or on Senate education, you have to take those opportunities out of all opportunities that you might have in the Capitol during your time of service, because the budget tells you where Texas is now, and the Education Committee tells you where Texas will be in the future. And if we've asked for these positions, sometimes you get what you ask for, right? Get paid the big bucks, as was mentioned. You know what? The checks that we cash are the purpose-driven life that we have for the brief moment that the voters and the public has allowed us to even be able to be blessed enough to make some of these decisions. And we have to make it count. And there's no greater subject this legislative session that we could be involved in than education reform.
And Senator Paxton, you kind of touched on this a little bit. You know, when you look at the TEA report for a charter school waiting list, there's right now fastly approaching 60,000 kids on the charter school waiting list. It really is 58,588. So those are parents who are saying, I'm looking for an alternative option. Not that I'm against public schools, I'm just looking for an alternative option. How do we then develop policy with that sort of urgency out there, that kind of ringing out there in the voice of Texans? How do we develop some policy that would kind of help remove some of the barriers for those parents who are trying to help their kids get the best educational options?
Well, I'm proud to have filed a bill to kind of speed up the timeline for charters to go from 0 to 60 so that we can get those charter schools online faster. It's not a quick process, and there's a lot involved. But you know, I think doing things like that. The main thing is we need to. I mean, everyone needs to look at that eye to eye, right? Make eye contact with what does it say that we have a wait list of 60,000 people. And when we talk about choosing, right, people are always, not always when they choose something, they're not always, or when they choose something different, they're not always choosing away. Many times, sometimes they are, but many times we're choosing toward, right? It's like, not that this is bad, but I think that's better. I have 4 kids, they're all different, right? And so we were thinking about what's the best fit for them? What best fits their gifts and their talents, and you know what we can see, you know, God dreaming for them, right? So I think those are we have to look at the practical steps like speeding up the charter school, and then I think the process for charter schools, because it's clear we got data. There's 60,000 families that are waiting for a spot. And, you know, school districts actually have the ability to have charter schools themselves within their districts. Mm-hmm. I say, let's do it. Go for it. Go for it, ISDs. You can do this too. And then you can still be in charge of how it looks and everything else, right? But I also think, you know, ultimately, the missing piece for us right now is the dollar following the child. And I'm excited about legislation that has already been filed, that I've worked on quite a bit, my staff has worked on, to have an ESA for special ed kids that has parent-directed spending for special ed kids. Listen, if folks in the legislature are not willing to let families of kids with special needs who just can't get what those kids need where they are, if they're not willing to let those families put them where they can get the help that they need so that they can be successful, they should be ashamed of themselves. They really should.
I'm going to shift gears because I only got a few more minutes, but I do want to get this in. This is so important. I have to speak to the school-to-prison pipeline and the correlation between failing schools and thriving prisons, along with the correlation between the ability to read and student success and how that plays into prisons with the lack thereof. You know, according to TDCJ, 80% of the inmates that we have are functionally illiterate. 70% are reading below a fourth grade level. And 48% of those are dyslexic. And so it's not like I just woke up and didn't want to do my homework if I'm experiencing dyslexia. But dyslexia can be addressed, you know, and it usually is, and typically it's identified between the age of 1 and 7 early on. And if we would identify those students who are experiencing dyslexia, provide them with, or give their parents the options if that school that they're in, at zip code that they're in, don't have the services, to take their kid to go to another zip code where it does have the services. I think that that would have a huge impact on reducing the amount of students that we find that go in, drop out of high school and drop into criminal justice. And I'm going to give you a little personal story. My two youngest, I have 4 kids. No, actually, I have 1 kid with 4 different personalities. They're all different, right? You know, but they got one daddy's love. That's the oneness. They got the same daddy's love, but I got 4 of them. And my daughter was having problems in math, and I didn't know anything about dyscalculia. I really didn't. And so my wife said, well, the teacher wanted to get Leela tested for dyscalculia, dyslexia. I said, well, you're a lawyer, I'm a doctor. We don't have dyslexia. But then I'll tell you another thing about this. And so she was tested, and she actually had dyscalculia, you know, and she got nervous when it came time for her to work a math problem. And she wanted to avoid it, you know. And that's when it really hit my memory, because dyslexia there's a 40 to 60% chance of it being hereditary. And when I read that, I was like, when I had to take those remedial courses in reading and math, I might have had dyslexia, because they were showing me, you know, I had to actually take remedial reading, and I didn't get treated for it until my freshman year in college. And when I got there, they said, you have to take 15 hours of remedial reading, math, and all this. And then I said to myself, sure, that's where my kid got it from me. And so, but what about all of my friends? I grew up in a poor neighborhood, and most of my friends hated to read, and they shied away from it. A lot of them got in trouble, and they chose the streets away from school. What can we do? I know that education savings accounts will help parents like in a poor community like I grew up in, because we didn't have anything like that in my zip code to help us. I got by a lot because I was talented in basketball, and I had a good personality, and people kind of liked me, and so they kind of gave me special favors. But when I got to college as a freshman, they said, no special favors, you're taking remedial. What can we do now to help those kids who are trapped in those zip codes and can't get out and can't go anywhere else?
Lift up public schools with funding initiatives, not on old ways we've deployed that funding, but with new ways related to special needs and 504, and separate from that, past school choice. You gave the answer. I should have asked the question.
Makes all the sense, right, in the world of me. And so we've now come to the very fun part of our panel discussion. This is the real fun part. But guess what, class? It takes a little order, so our folks are going to get around to you. So if you raise your hand up, our folks are going to come to you, and I want you to ask a question. And I know everybody's passionate, but let's get her going.
I just want to make a couple of comments.
Is it on?
Can I talk really loud? Can you hear me back?
Hey, Robin, we know you know how to do it.
I just want to add one, the first thing that's important.
This will help us get you on the record.
All children are special ed. Every child has different needs and different requirements. One of the things in my experience, I had a gifted and talented son who was reading early Seuss books by the time he was 4. Went into first grade where they all had to read in one classroom and listen as everyone was there. As the other students struggled through blending DOG, my son was turning the page and getting demerits. My son hated to read by the end of first grade. So one thing that I got out of that is that we've gone away from grouping according to ability, so that when I homeschooled my son, which we ended up doing, he was the most arrogant son of a so-and-so because there were two bright and gifted and talented in the classroom. He just thought he was really bright and everyone else was really stupid. And I'm telling you, when I went through school, we grouped, and I knew I might be good in math, but I knew that the other students could beat me in science and math or in reading or whatever. It makes a difference, and you can have better teachers that can relate to different abilities of students, and we totally ignore that. I've had principals tell me when we interviewed them as trustees, coming in to become a trustee, telling me, I had an English teacher and a math teacher in 4th grade, and they got a little too comfortable, so I just made them switch subjects. And I wanted to pull my hair out. The person that had the passion, whose students learned the math from the math teacher, now had him struggling to teach English and vice versa. There are many problems we have in our schools, but what we need to remember, all students are individuals with different needs.
Good.
And even the best school can't meet all needs.
There you go. Next hand.
Hi there, my name is Zachary Lyman. I'm a student at Shriner University. I wanted to ask, because you, Mr. Johnson, said yourself that education is the most direct route to upward mobility for students. And what I am finding in my cultural studies classes and my research is that with students in high school of lower socioeconomic status, they're exposed more often to a narrative that is, you know, you don't need to try that hard in school. You can just go through it, the bare minimum, so that you can go ahead and just move on into the workforce. And so what I wanted to ask this panel is, how can we challenge that cultural narrative through legislation or through education reform?
Well, we talked a little bit about this morning. It goes in the education hearing. I think part of what we are, as a result of a lot of the up close and personal view that we got on what was going on in classrooms because of COVID, really, in some ways, we have come to discover, like you said, Dr. Johnson, that our kids are not being taught at grade level in the classroom. And it's particularly concerning when you kind of get to the, very low numbers of kids that are actually being taught grade level material along the way, but our graduation rates are getting better. And so there's something really off there, right? So I think one of the things we really do have to make sure is happening is that we are teaching at grade level in the classroom. And that requires accountability. I don't know that requires, we're already instructing them to teach at grade level. And that's legislatively, they're already supposed to do that. But as I had a colleague when I was teaching, and she always said, inspect what you expect. Yeah. So I think what that means is when there's good accountability around things, sometimes some teachers are just trying to find something that looks like this, right? I mean, they're having to do curriculum planning and delivering instruction and grading and documenting all sorts of things. They've got a lot of jobs. They're trying to do the best they can. We need to be providing teachers with a full set of developed on-level curriculum so that they can focus on the delivery of that instruction and monitoring the learning and making sure they're assessing that as informative and summary assessment. So I think that's where the focus needs to be. That goes back to the classroom. So
I would just add to that I don't know how legislators draft a sentence, and I'm looking for the perfect one, to change culture. I don't know how legislators draft the perfect sentence to encourage parental involvement. I'm not sure about that. That's the straight talk coming from me. If you have the suggestion on that, our doors are wide open 19 hours a day right now. But I've served as principal for a day in a school in my district where a dad was pulling his son out of 8th grade, permanently out of school to go to work because no one in his family had ever gone past the 3rd grade. So from a generational standpoint, they were celebrating and could not be more excited that that child went 5 grades further than he did or his grandfather did or any others in the family. So from a cultural standpoint, I'm not sure as a lawmaker what sentence I draft to outrun that. And I'm ready to partner with you and all others to try to figure it out.
And I'd just like to add one other thing to that. At the luncheon, Governor Abbott said, what was our goal for education? And that goal, he told all of us, was to be number 1. And then we back out from that point, everything is going to take to be number 1. And that's going to be changing mindsets, it's going to be changing cultures, it's setting expectations, and we're going to have to be able to do that across the board. And if we do that and hold steady, I believe that it'll have a cultural effect across the board in the state of Texas. But the next person, we gotta keep moving on, because I really want to catch everybody and watch. It's gonna get all the way to the end. I'm gonna have 5 hands up, and we're gonna have 1 minute. Who's next?
I'm Jane Kinsino with Americans for Prosperity, and I have a question about following the money. Some of our allies for school choice are concerned about regulation. I hadn't been in the because it seemed like that all the 30 states pretty much hadn't experienced that until I heard that West Virginia is starting to cause that question to be raised because there is some regulation going on. And I want to know what Texas is going to do to keep the camel's nose out of the tent, because there's 30, the problem is that the accountability is important to make sure that the parents are using the money for education, but government, when we let them in a little bit, a lot of times will go too far. And so I want to know what freedom-loving conservative legislators are thinking on that issue.
Well, just briefly, I think what you're talking about is fear of strings attached, right? And so I think we do have to strike the balance between what sort of regulation is appropriate as far as accountability for progress, measuring academic achievement. I think there are very good measures that are available to us. I think we have other states, unfortunately, that are down the road from us, right? It ought to be us, but we can look at what other states are doing. And then I think that accountability from all of us here to make sure that we stay in the lines, right? We have to always make sure we're keeping government in its lane, no matter what it is, whether it's education or anything else. So, that's all I can say is I think that's very important to me. And so we just have to look at each piece of legislation and make sure that we're striking the right balance and we are not letting the camel get the nose under the tent. Too bad.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would just add that if you look at these dollars, as dollars that belong to the family instead of dollars that belong to the government, these are very simple decisions to make. It doesn't have to be complex, right? So our goal, and I know I speak for many of our colleagues that we work with that are helping us with this issue and many others, is to not complicate things with the strings that many are concerned about, like we would see on a Band-Aid one-size-fits-all approach out of Washington, D.C. That's not going to be what Texas stands for, and I think we will accomplish it. As Senator Paxton mentioned, that we already have alternative testing measures and other tools and resources available.
Next question.
Thank you very much to our distinguished panel. So I think that to improve our education, maybe I'm just being very naive here. What is it that we cannot do to relax some of the teachers' licensing requirements. My son is at a charter school. It's wonderful, Basis Charter School. They hire teachers that are subject experts, physics PhDs to teach my son's science class. He's in 4th grade. And what we need are teachers that are truly passionate about their field, and they are truly experts in that space, so they would spend less time to talk about nonsense, and they would truly teach our kids what they need to learn. So what do we need to do to sort of have more of these kind of folks to come into the education space to educate our next generation? Is there something that we can do on the legislature, in the legislature? So just curious. Thank you.
Our office is wide open for suggestions on how to relax licensing overall, right? I mean, I think the legislature is looking at all professional licenses right now in sort of a reevaluation of why government is involved in many of the licensing requirements beyond fees and additional revenue that we're involved in. In the teaching profession, we have many concepts on the table right now for this session that speak exactly to that, as we're hemorrhaging teachers, right? Now, I say that we're losing teachers, but at the same time, we have more teachers employed in Texas than we ever have before, but we've also put more available revenue into opening up new positions for teachers, and those are yet to be filled. So they can reconcile the two data points at the same time. But we need teachers, we need good teachers in the profession, we need them staying in the profession, because 77% of teachers surveyed right now in Texas are considering another line of work. Thank you for what you mentioned, and we are reviewing licensure.
We have a hand over here that was up. And then come over here.
I prayed about this before coming, so I feel like I'm led to say this, and I'll try and be terse, but that is not my forte.
It's a question though, right?
Yes, it is a question. The power of the senators in our legislature
Put the mic up.
is in your bottom line. That's where you'll find all of your power to change things. It's hard to change a culture. Start with the bottom line. I believe we should have. How do you feel about having outside audits of our school districts? Because I think you're going to find that the number of students are the same, the number of teachers are the same, and where are all the costs and the numbers? Administration, we've turned into the universities. And so if you demand the districts be financially neutral, or neutral, what is it called? It's neutral, where it's you don't get any more money. Take it from administration, where you put all of the money, take it from there and give it to the teaching process, because that's where parents want their money to go. We'll support the teachers, but the teachers are second. My kid is first. And that's the way I look at it I actually a parent of a child anymore. But if you have children, and that's the way I look at it for anybody who has a child in the school district. Now, part of the problem is that the bond issues.
We're gonna have to get to the question, because it's got about five more.
Okay, so you
in
want
our
it to
time,
be
yeah.
revenue
I wanna
neutral,
help other
and then
people.
the other thing is that you want the teachers. There was a legitimate, credible poll that says, how can we keep teachers from quitting or bring more teachers into the system? And that the teachers said, we want more money and we want more time, so that we can, on the teacher's time or on the school's time, do the planning.
Got it.
So extend the year.
You got to give me a question though right now,
do you
because
believe
not
that
old
the
sergeant
school,
finna come out.
do you believe that the school districts then, if they want to honor what the teachers want, should extend the year, and the teachers should work all year long? Because
question we're gonna hold right there.
Okay.
Don't answer it for me. Do you believe that we should have extended year and teachers work year round?
I mean, I think that's
No.
I think that's something that would be a great choice, type of a local choice for districts to make, or certain campuses within a district to make. So I think that's something that would be a great choice, and then parents can choose if they like that. Some would, some wouldn't.
It's a great choice.
We're having school districts consider longer years. We're having school districts like Crosby ISD this week decided on a 4-day week. And at the same time, their calendar, is going to have to make adjustments for the entire school year based on that. Again, there are decisions that we make, and there are decisions that local school board trustees and the funding associated from those local tax rates that they make, a different model than the Florida model, where we have so many of these tax rates across the state. So in district diverse needs across the state, we're going to have to be hearing more and more about that as our bills are filed on that subject. You're right about administration. I mean, in the last 10 years, the number of teachers has grown 7%, the number of students has grown 6%, and the number of administrators has grown 86%.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Janine Washington. I'm representing the LLC Houston chapter. And my question is directed more so towards the parents who are low income and their affordability for this payment plan for school choice. Because I'm still kind of hearing that there might be, for them to invest in it so that they can get their children the education. Did I hear that correctly? Like, just for clarity, like, is there going to be a payment plan in order to make that final school choice for some parents?
Are you saying, are we looking at ways so that tax dollars can fund the student's education, so it doesn't have to come out of pocket of the parents?
Well, yes, because now you just
Is that what you're
yes,
saying?
ma'am. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Right. I mean, I think there are a number of different ideas that are out there, but the idea of the dollar following the child is that the funding that would have gone to the school district, the kid isn't there. They're in another place, so that funding would follow them. Now, and I think, there's some thoughts about, well, what if a private school, does a private school then have to charge only that tuition? And I think there are probably different ideas out there. We'll be listening to a lot of ideas this session. But I think one thing I've heard a lot of support for is, not tying the hands of any school to do what they want to do, but that could kind of apply the tax credit, the savings account, the whatever the amount is.
Education
And
savings.
so, yes, education savings account. And then the delta, the difference in tuition, would be something perhaps that a parent would need to come up with. But it would certainly be significantly different than if they were having to do the whole thing themselves. There would be other options, I would think, because the market would work this way,
dictate
that
it.
would fit the number that would be the school tuition at a state school.
Okay, we got one more. We got 1 minute. We got 1 minute. We got one more. Come on. It's hard. See, I told you we were going to get down to this, but I tell you, here's the great thing. Once we're done, generally the panelists kind of hang out for about 5 or so minutes, and you guys can still come up and ask some questions like that, okay?
I'm going to get right to the question. So you said that addressing culture is a challenge, and I agree with that. I also know that when it comes to human beings, they respond to two things: incentives and consequences. Okay? I have spent the last 2 years reading through the Texas Education Code. It's full of paper tigers. Let's take Senate Bill 3, Senate Bill, the critical race theory bill. Was that Senate Bill 3?
You got to get me a question.
The question is, there's no accountability, there's no consequences. Do you think there's any value in writing legislation and amending quality legislation that already exists if you put consequences in there to deter behavior? Because your legislation, I'm sorry, it doesn't mean anything if I violate it and nothing happens.
I got it. Teeth in the bill.
So many times when we pass a bill, here's the straight talk, you may think, what in the world are y'all thinking? It might be the 12th version of the idea. The other 11 best ideas couldn't pass. So when we get to the 12th version of what was the original thought, past the other 11 versions, and we just get to the version that we can pass, we start the process down the road of at least giving the school districts the knowledge of the spirit and intent of the legislation itself, that we're not going to tolerate the teaching of critical race theory in Texas schools, and it fires a shot over the bow. Then the next session, we come back and we add enforcement provisions, we expand it to the higher education arena, we keep going with that topic. Like I could mention 15 other topics that over a 10-year span, we've continued to beef it up more and more and more. But a lot of times when there's a cause of action related to lawsuits, or there's an enforcement provision that's not clear among the members how exactly that will work, we have to go to the next session before we add it, and that's exactly what happened there.
I would agree with that, and it usually takes several sessions to really kind of, as an idea is maturing, and we're learning from where we were. But I think what we're talking about here is we want to get a stake in the ground. We want to get the ball as far down the field as we possibly can. And that means to get something passed. And so I think we're going to pass the most aggressive, strongest thing that we can pass. And it may not be the purest thing. It isn't always the purest thing, because we've got to get other people to vote for it. Sometimes it's less than that, but it's something, and it's a place to start. It's the flag in the ground, right? So we can keep moving.
And we have examples where critical race theory as an example is still being taught, but we also have so many examples from parents all over Texas saying, look, this was in my school district, and I'm noticing something different now because y'all codified a ban on it. So we're getting very good feedback as a result of the bill that we passed, and we'll continue to strengthen those measures this session and the next.
Just like your kids, I'm sorry.
No, go
I'm
right
thinking
ahead, go
about,
ahead.
you know how if you have children, and you can say, stop that. And there's one of your kids that'll go, okay. And there's another one that was like, and they wait and they're like, I think she's not looking now. And then they do it. And then there's the other one that'll look you straight in the eye and go, no, right? So I mean, that legislation's like that. That really is, a lot of our legislation is like, don't make me come down there, but we had to, right? So anyway.
So, give them a round of applause. Thank our panelists, wonderful, wonderful guys. Hey, look, you guys have been great. You've been a great class. I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge our very own Senator Larry Taylor. He's our guy. He's in the house. And God bless your heart for being here. I hope you got a lot of takeaways, wrote down a lot of things you can go back and utilize in your area. And we look forward to you moving forward with this conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.